Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Azerbaijan says Armenian forces have violated a U.S.-brokered humanitarian truce. The Azeri Defense Ministry says the Armenian forces shelled villages in Tartar and Lashin regions. However, authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh have accused Azeri forces of launching a missile attack. More than 1,000 people have been killed in the clashes that erupted on the 27th of September. Nigeria has imposed curfew in 4 more states as mass protests against police brutality turn violent. 13 states are currently under restrictions. This follows increasing cases of looting on government-run warehouses across the country. Chileans have voted overwhelmingly for the country's constitution to be redrafted. With 90% of the votes counted, 78% of the people said yes to a fresh charter. The referendum was prompted by mass protests across the country. President Sebastián Piñera has accepted the results and has praised the peaceful vote. The global number of coronavirus infections is nearing 43 million with over 1.15 million deaths. India's caseload has topped 7.9 million after more than 45,000 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 3 lives overnight, with the tally reaching 6,739. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating the latest humanitarian truce. This comes after U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun announced a ceasefire following a meeting with the foreign ministers of both countries.
Azerbaijan claims Armenian forces have violated a U.S.-brokered humanitarian truce. The Azeri Defense Ministry says Armenian forces shelled villages in the Tartar and Lachin regions. However, authorities in the Nagorno-Karabakh have accused Azeri forces of launching a missile attack. Earlier, a joint statement by the United States, Armenia, and Azerbaijan said the ceasefire came into effect this morning. In a tweet, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated both Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders. Meanwhile, the OSCE Minsk Group said its co-chairs and foreign ministers will meet again on October 29th to discuss the issue. It said the talks will focus on starting talks for a comprehensive solution to the conflict. Earlier, Azerbaijan said it liberated several villages of the Zangilan, Jabrail, and Gabaldi regions from the Armenian occupation. More than 1,000 people have been killed in the clashes that erupted on the 27th of September.
Moving on, Nigeria has imposed curfew in 4 more states as mass protests against police brutality turn violent. 13 states are currently under restrictions. Kaduna State Governor Nasir Ahmed Al-Rufai says the 24-hour curfew has been declared to ban protests. The Deputy Governor of Taraba said the state curfew follows the incident of goods loot at state storehouses. 2 weeks ago, mass demonstrations against police brutality were triggered by the killing of a young man by police. And Pakistan has urged Facebook to ban Islamophobic content just the way it has banned anti-Holocaust posts. In a letter to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Prime Minister Imran Khan asked him to remove content spreading hate against Muslims. PM Khan says Muslims today are being persecuted akin to the oppression of Jews by Nazis. He said Muslims are abused and vilified on social media platforms. Khan said Facebook should act against this marginalization of Muslims, which inevitably leads to extremism. This comes days after French President Emmanuel Macron allowed the publishing of blasphemous cartoons. Now, the coronavirus has claimed 3 more lives in Pakistan overnight, raising the death toll to 6,739. The health ministry says 707 people tested positive for the disease in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 10,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 328,000 countrywide cases, more than 311,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 143,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 102,000 cases. In the capital city, Islamabad, nearly 19,000 have been infected so far. Now, the global number of coronavirus infections is nearing 43 million, with over 1.15 million deaths. India's caseload has topped 7.9 million after more than 45,000 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. More in this report.
Even after months of COVID-19, the world is still struggling to find a way to contain the virus as it continues to relapse. Europe has reported the highest daily surge in cases for the 3rd consecutive day. Hospital admissions and deaths continue to overwhelm the region. France continues to shatter grim record of highest daily cases. Spain has imposed a national emergency and nighttime curfew amid an aggressive outbreak in the country.
Que vivimos es extrema.
To inform you that the government held an extraordinary cabinet meeting that has decreed a state of emergency throughout the country. We are living in an extreme situation. It is in fact the most serious health emergency experienced by Spain since the approval of our constitution in 1978 and also in the last half century.
The number of Russians exposed to the virus has surpassed 1.5 million as the death toll rises over 25,000. The virus-ravaged India is now bracing for another spike in cases due to the mass gathering in the ongoing festive season.
Earlier, people were cautious regarding COVID-19, but now they are getting more careless every day. However, administration is still trying to be strict to no avail. Earlier, the infections in Aligarh were rising at 100 to 150 every day, which is now coming down. But people have definitely become very careless.
Meanwhile, China has reported 137 asymptomatic COVID-19 cases, which is the highest in nearly 7 months.
Now, South Korea is urging citizens to get influenza shots despite 48 deaths following the vaccination this month. Authorities say they found no direct link between the deaths and the flu shots. Public anxiety over the safety of flu vaccines has surged after the fatalities. Last month, about 5 million doses had to be disposed of after not being stored at recommended temperatures. Last year, more than 1,500 elderly people died within 7 days of vaccination, but the government said deaths were not linked to the shots. Meanwhile, Singapore became one of the first nations to call a temporary halt to the use of 2 influenza vaccines as a precaution. In other news, Chileans have voted overwhelmingly for the country's constitution to be redrafted. With 90% of the votes counted, 78% of the people said yes to a fresh charter. President Sebastián Piñera has accepted the results and praised the peaceful vote. Majority voted for the new constitution to be drafted by a convention comprising of citizens, which will be elected in April. The referendum was prompted by mass protests, which began in Chile a year ago, demanding to fix deep inequalities in the society. The old constitution was drafted in 1980 during the Augusto Pinochet military dictatorship. Now, in the United States, pre-election voting for the November presidential election has surpassed all early ballots that were cast in 2016. More than 58.7 million Americans have voted so far, compared to around 58.3 million 4 years ago. Pre-election day voting is skyrocketing nationwide amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. With 9 days to go in the election, early voting locations have opened in the states of Florida and Texas. Democrats continue to dominate the initial balloting, but Republicans are aggressively narrowing the gap. In Florida, Democrats have outvoted Republicans by a 596,000 margin by mail. With 150 million total votes expected, analysts predict the highest possible turnout in a U.S. presidential election since 1908. Greece says it is planning to expand security relations with the United States. In a parliamentary address, Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias said Athens might sign a new agreement with Washington. Nikos Dendias said Greece will immediately begin a dialogue on the expansion of the Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement. Dendias said the strengthening of U.S. and Greek relations is evident through recent meetings with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The statement comes as Athens looks for support from allies amid escalating tensions with Ankara in the East Mediterranean. And Ireland says Britain and the European Union are likely to secure a free trade deal in the coming weeks. In an interview, Deputy Premier Leo Varadkar said there is no guarantee of a deal, but he hopes the two sides will agree on the issue. He said there will be no quotas and no tariffs if a trade deal is reached between Brussels and London. Meanwhile, EU Chief Negotiator Michel Barnier is planning to extend his visit to London until the 28th of October. Britain and the EU have made good progress in talks on a trade deal that will prevent a tumultuous finale to the Brexit crisis. And moving on, Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The show was organized in line with COVID-19 regulations. More in the following report.
Andrea Bocelli is one of the world's most famous opera singers, who has sold over 90 million records worldwide, and he looked in good spirits as he performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The performance aimed to launch a message of strength and union among the 7 UNESCO sites in Sicily.
I already came here many years ago. I love Sicily because it is a land that gave birth to many big musicians. For me, it means a lot to sing here.
The tenor was accompanied by the orchestra and the choir of the Theatre Massimo Bellini of Catania, directed by Alberto Bartolini.
In Finland, nature's most spectacular light show, the Aurora Borealis, lit up the sky above Lapland region, north of the Arctic Circle. Large swathes of green with streaks of white and purple shone through a layer of cloud over the village of Utsujoki. The northern lights are the result of collisions between the Earth's gaseous particles and matter released by the sun's atmosphere. The northern lights are visible on roughly 200 nights a year in the area. And a 9-day fashion week has kicked off in Beijing's art zone following the easing of coronavirus restrictions. More in the following report.
While international fashion weeks have gone fully digital with few physical runways due to COVID-19, China's domestic fashion weeks are blooming with extravagant offline ceremonies. China's Fashion Week commenced this week in the capital, Beijing. Masks were not mandatory in the audience and very few people were seen wearing them. Social distancing measures were not in place during the show and backstage.
Under different lights, the material looks different. You can feel it if you watch the show offline, such as the gloss or if it is light enough to float in the air. But if watching online, you cannot feel these kinds of characteristics.
After the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic hit, the country's fashion industry had a rebound in August. The recovery made China a lone bright spot in the retail world for the global consumer brands like Louis Vuitton.
The data of this year will look better and better monthly. Like what I've said, in August, the domestic consumption on clothing increased 4.4%. I think in terms of fashion industry in the fourth quarter, winter clothing is the most important. The value of it is more important than that of summer.
China has so far recorded more than 85,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, with the death toll crossing 4,500.
We'll be back with more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Stocks in the Asia-Pacific are trading mixed as new coronavirus cases surge in the U.S. and other countries across Europe. In mainland Chinese stocks, the Shanghai Composite has shed over 0.5%, while the Shenzhen component added close to 0.5%. Japan's Nikkei 225 and the Topix Index have slipped too. Over in South Korea, the Kospi has declined marginally. Shares in Australia are hovering just below the flat line. But bucking the trend, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index has managed to gain over 0.5%. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.